Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight for day number 16 of our 50-day journey into the culmination of celebrating 20 years of ministry happening next month, August the 16th, the official date, and then we'll celebrate that weekend beginning August the 18th. So we're excited about all that God is doing and just the grace of God, this favor and grace that has been demonstrated towards us over these last 2 decades. And I am privileged to be able to share just a glimpse of it through some lessons that I have learned on the job in real time. And by God's grace, been able to capture the essence of the first 20 years of ministry per se and put them in a small booklet that is designed in part to serve as an icebreaker for healthy conversations around some things that are sensitive and some that are absolutely necessary among leaders, leadership teams, and those who are emerging in any aspect of leading. Some of these principles can also correlate with natural assignments as well. And so I am convinced that the way things operate um, is that faith without works is dead, and so is the body without the spirit, which means that everything we see that drives life in the natural realm has its origin in the spiritual realm. And this is consistent with both those who are partakers of light and practitioners of darkness. And so we're just sharing some principles to empower the believers, to encourage you, but especially those who have leadership responsibilities. And so, lesson number 16, you will be marked by your decisions. There are times when decisions must be made, and the need to make them will challenge you to the core. Never make them in haste. Stay open to hear counsel and adjust as deemed necessary. And lastly, realize that you will not always have the answers. Sometimes you will simply have to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure what to do. This will give way to divine interventions from the one who knows all things. And so at the end of the day, decisions are ones to be made. I'll never forget a man of God that I had acquainted for a short period of time over the tenure of our ministry. I don't have any access or connectivity to him now, but it was a statement he coined. I had never heard it in light of a conversation that decisions are ones to be made. So, in other words, regardless of how you may look at, view, or what perspective you may glean from a specific episode of life, when it comes down to who you are, your overall progression, maturation, development, decisions must be made. Decisions basically, I believe, supply the fuel to things that God perhaps has called us to do, things that by way of gifting that we have been empowered to facilitate. You got to make a decision to actually do what it is that's before you as it relates to a gifting, an assignment, or even some practical things in life. And I put together just 7 brief things that I want to share with you about the importance of decision making, where you've got to basically decide, decide to grow as a believer in the grace and knowledge of Christ. That should be something that every born again believer actually adheres to, where you make a decision to grow in grace and in knowledge. As a matter of fact, in Proverbs 11 21, it says, a hypocrite with his mouth will destroy his neighbor, but the just through knowledge shall be delivered. And so there is a delivering dimension that's consistent with knowledge. And when the believer decides to grow in grace and the knowledge of Christ, it will give credence to deliverance, where you will be emancipated from things, people, and even places in life that perhaps have served as a source of indifference, pain, and agony for you. Like, decide to be healed if you have been wounded. Decide to be made whole and mended if you have been broken. Decide to live if things have been working against you, seeking to facilitate some type of death or separation from this realm that we live in. Decide to live. And so, number 2, I put decide to be well versed across a broad spectrum of things that are actually influencing the world. You know, I've dealt with believers across a broad spectrum of life, and in America in particular, sadly to say, most American believers have tailored their revelation of what the world is like based on what's happening in America. There are 6 or 7 billion people on this planet, and I don't think America houses perhaps maybe a third of the actual global population. There's so many different cultures that are awesome, so many different types of cuisines across the global scale that are awesome indeed, and we could simply be relegated to just American cuisine, like traveling overseas and being acquainted with cutlery instead of silverware, dealing with serviettes instead of napkins and paper towels, and just the different languages, the wordplay that comes with specific cultures, and uh, going into certain parts of the world and trying out foods for the first time, and things that I was totally oblivious to, but having a mind to grow, to acquire knowledge that covers a broad spectrum of things, and to be able to relate to people from various cultures in life without having any sense of indifference towards them, but being able to celebrate their uniqueness as well. That is a gift, that is a grace. And Father has been so faithful. So decide to be well versed across a broad spectrum of things that influence the world. Number three, decide to build a quality life that covers the natural and spiritual dimensions of who you are. Sometimes we can just be doing things and not with the intent of it being qualitative. Like, I'll give you an example. For anything that's legitimate that comes on the market, um, let's just say in the realm of retail, and you may find a specific brand that you are attracted to, Burberry or Fendi or something of that nature. And on the black market, you'll also find that these counterfeits will be made to mimic the genuine. But when you become acquainted with that which is qualitative, and the moment you touch it, the moment if it's a garment, you put it on your body, or fragrance that you smell, and the wisdom that goes into that, and the skill required, then you would never go for anything that is subpar, because you've developed an appetite or desire for things that are qualitative in nature. It should be that way for doctrine. It should be that way for spiritual things. It should be that way for our walk with Christ. It should be that way for how we communicate the things of Christ. It should be that way. The relationships that we build is where we should seek to do things that are qualitative in nature. And so that's one where we build a quality life that covers the natural and the spiritual dimensions of who we are. And then number four, decide to forgive. I'm reading a book now by a guy, and his name is getting me right now. I just started reading this book. It was recommended from a meeting that I was in on Saturday, dealing with post traumatic stress disorder, and the two therapists that were sharing the lead in that session. It was so powerful, and a book was recommended that it didn't start with you. And the author of this book is very well versed in psychology, and has written articles for Psychology Today and Medium.com as well. And in the book, the author highlights something that I thought was so powerful when it came down to his life in particular, sharing his story, was that he had developed a sense of indifference towards his parents, and he sought means of relief from a physical ailment that hit him, loss of vision in particular. And he traveled around the globe, ended up in some part of the world where he was seeking spiritual gurus to try to help him get to the root cause of what was actually happening in his life. And when nothing began to work for him, he went a little further, seeking for the spiritual enlightenment. He uses the term, and he comes across these two spiritual teachers who were known to be at the apex of this specific thing he was pursuing. And both of them said the same thing to him after he waited an entire day to see them, 2 separate days. They tell him, go home and get it right with your parents. When he heard it the second time, he knew he had to reconcile. And he had something inside of him that was so resistant to his mother's love. He could go for months at a time, he said, without even communicating with his mom. And he had made up his mind when he got back to the States, he would be the first person that he, in fact, would engage. And he knew that the physical effects, his body would lock up like he would have an ironclad defense around him. And he couldn't receive her embrace, but she always embraced him. She always loved him. She always demonstrated just that nurturing affection towards him. And thank you so much, Sister Bailey. That is the name of the book. It didn't start with you, by Mark Wolin. So if you're looking at the comments, that is the book that you want to get, by Mark Wolin. And so he says that when this encounter took place, his body began to tense up. He became rigid, stomach knotted up. But he told his mom, don't let go. He was set to endure. Long story short, he broke through that, and that barrier that was resisting love from her left him. He chose to forgive his mom. He chose to forgive his father as well. And as a result, his vision was completely restored. And the ophthalmologist who was treating him could not believe it, would not believe it. But the man's vision had been completely restored, all because he chose to forgive. And he didn't know what he needed to forgive, but he needed to forgive because there was a proclivity in his lineage working towards him. So I don't want to spoil it for you. This is just in the introduction of the book. So I recommend that book. It's for mature believers who won't freak out because somebody mentions that they went to see a spiritual guru for spiritual enlightenment. Everything that we need to help us prosper in life, you get it fundamentally from the scriptures, but then God also gives insight to people. To give them, they dedicate their lives to researching things that we know spiritually, but in practicality we may not know how to execute. And so he lays it out on how to overcome family trauma. And it begins, I'm convinced, with anything in life that has caused a breach in your continuity, deciding to forgive is so powerful because it liberates you in a phenomenal way. And I've been on that point too long. Here's another one: decide to be a person of virtue and value. I made a decision some time ago to stick to the things I know, but to always be a student of life and purpose to continue growing. But then realizing that there are things that God has really called me to do. And this is where I give time, detailed attention, and intentional effort to grow and expand even more when it comes down to these specific things. Decide to be relational. Some of us are really challenged in this area, and rightfully so, because you could have been the recipient of just unjust and unwarranted dealings as you showed yourself to be friendly or kind towards others, and they took advantage of that. And maybe it was just a lack of skill and just wisdom to go into relationships with boundaries being set to preserve and protect your integrity, your sanity, your purity, your innocence as well. And sometimes it's like with life, you got to make adjustments to the ebbs and flows of life and be a person who's willing to continue to move forward and progress and whatever it is that God has called you to. But there is a need for people. There is a need for people. God is a spirit, and whatever God does for us, primarily, it'll be transacted, imparted, released, or demonstrated through people. That is the way it works. God made manifest in the flesh through the person of Jesus Christ, still needed a team, other humans, to help him extend his rule and manifest his kingdom in the earth realm. And so it's always from God through man to man. That's why being relational is so important. And then the last one is decide to be a just person and demonstrate what it means to be equitable. In other words, live a righteous life and demonstrate what it means to be a righteous person, to be an equitable individual, and what it means to be just. These are things that all of us need to make decisions concerning. And I just wanted to give you kind of a snapshot just to speak to your spirit tonight. But all of us will be marked by our decisions. That is the lesson number 16. Decisions are one simply to be made. So I trust that this has blessed you tonight. More grace, and we'll see you on tomorrow for lesson number 17 and day number 17 of our 50-day journey to commemorate 20 years of ministry. So great grace. Have a phenomenal evening, and we'll see you again on tomorrow. God bless.